The Encounter. Welcome back to PK BookSmarts, where we continue our journey into the Forest Acres incident. In part 1, we followed Misha as her late shift led to an unexpected walk through a seemingly safe neighborhood. But as night falls, she's about to find out that not everything is as it seems. If you enjoy the story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to PK BookSmarts on all social platforms. Now, let's dive into the Forest Acres incident, part 2. Misha started walking, her footsteps echoing eerily on the empty street. The soft rustle of leaves in the wind was the only sound accompanying her. The neighborhood was well maintained, the kind of place where families settled down and everyone knew their neighbors. But as she walked, something felt off. It was too quiet. The usual nighttime sounds, crickets, distant traffic, even the hum of air conditioners were strangely absent. The silence pressed in on her, making her feel like she was the only living thing in the world. She quickened her pace, her eyes darting from side to side. The streetlights cast long, distorted shadows that seemed to twist and move as she passed. The further she walked, the more the houses began to change. The tidy lawns gave way to overgrown weeds, and the houses seemed to grow darker, their windows like black, empty eyes watching her. Misha's unease grew with every step. She glanced behind her and saw nothing but the empty road stretching back into the darkness. The feeling of being watched was growing stronger, though she couldn't see anyone around. Suddenly, a figure stepped out from the shadows ahead of her. Misha's heart skipped a beat as she stopped in her tracks. It was a man, tall and thin, wearing a hooded jacket that obscured most of his face. He stood perfectly still, blocking her path. Misha's instinct screamed at her to turn around and run, but she was frozen, her breath caught in her throat. The man didn't move, just stood there, his presence looming and menacing. "Excuse me," she managed to say, her voice trembling. "I'm just trying to get back to campus." The man tilted his head slightly, as if considering her words. Then, without warning, he took a step forward. Misha backed up, her pulse racing. She turned to bolt back the way she had come, but her heart dropped as she saw two more figures emerging from the shadows behind her. Panic surged through her as she realized she was surrounded. The streetlights flickered ominously, casting the figures in a sickly yellow glow. The men closed in, their footsteps slow and deliberate, like predators toying with their prey. Misha's mind raced. She had to think, had to find a way out. She noticed a narrow alleyway between two houses to her left. Without hesitation, she darted toward it, her feet pounding against the pavement as she ran for her life. The alleyway was narrow and claustrophobic, the walls of the houses on either side pressing in on her. She could hear the footsteps behind her, the sound of her pursuers gaining ground. Misha's lungs burned as she sprinted, the cold air stabbing at her throat with each breath. She could see the end of the alley up ahead, where it opened into another street. She pushed herself harder, her legs screaming in protest as she forced them to move faster. The footsteps behind her grew louder, closer. She could almost feel their breath on the back of her neck. Finally, she burst out of the alley and onto the new street, barely pausing to glance around. Her eyes landed on an old, run-down convenience store at the corner. The lights inside were dim, but they were on, and it was her only hope. She sprinted toward the store, praying it was open. The door was unlocked, and she slammed it behind her, locking it quickly and leaning against it as she tried to catch her breath. The store was eerily quiet, the fluorescent lights flickering above. Shelves lined with dusty goods filled the small space, and a single cashier stood behind the counter, staring at her with wide eyes. "Please," Misha gasped, her voice shaking. "Call the police. There are men." Before she could finish, the lights went out, plunging the store into darkness. Misha's heart pounded in her ears as she tried to adjust to the sudden darkness. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of her ragged breathing. She fumbled for her phone, the small screen casting a weak light as she tried to find the cashier. But when she shined the light toward the counter, it was empty. The cashier was gone. Panic clawed at her, but she forced herself to move. She had to find a way out, had to escape before they found her. She stumbled through the aisles, knocking over cans and boxes as she searched for a back exit. Finally, she found a door at the back of the store. She pushed it open, the hinges creaking loudly in the silence. Beyond it was an old, overgrown yard, leading into more dark streets. Misha hesitated for a split second, knowing she had no choice but to keep running. She bolted out the door and into the yard, the tall grass brushing against her legs as she ran. The neighborhood beyond was different from the one she had walked through earlier. Darker, more menacing. The houses here were decrepit, their windows broken, their doors hanging off their hinges. She didn't stop. She kept running, her only goal to get back to campus, back to safety. She could still hear the distant footsteps behind her, the pursuers relentless in their chase. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she saw the familiar gates of Benedict College ahead. She didn't slow down until she was through the gates and on campus grounds. Only then did she collapse on a bench, gasping for breath, her body trembling with exhaustion and fear. Misha sat there for a long time, the adrenaline slowly leaving her system. The campus was quiet, peaceful even, a stark contrast to the nightmare she had just escaped. She looked back toward the gate, half expecting to see the shadowy figures still following her. But there was nothing, just the silent street beyond, empty and still. She pulled out her phone, her hands shaking as she dialed campus security. They responded quickly, but when they checked the area she described, they found nothing unusual, no sign of the men, no evidence of what she had gone through. It was as if the entire experience had been a twisted hallucination, a nightmare born from the darkness of Forest Acres. But Misha knew what she had seen, what she had felt, and she knew that Forest Acres was far more dangerous than anyone realized. As she finally made her way back to her dorm, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was still being watched, that the darkness had followed her back to campus. She locked her door and sat on her bed, her mind racing. Forest Acres was only a good neighborhood if you passed through it quickly, preferably in a car. Misha had learned that the hard way. She lay down, closing her eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. The faces of those men, their slow, predatory movements, haunted her every thought. She knew she had narrowly escaped something far worse than just a late-night scare. And she knew that she would never take the safety of the familiar for granted again. Thank you for joining us on this terrifying journey through the Forest Acres incident. If Misha's story gave you chills, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to PK BookSmarts on all social platforms. Share your thoughts and experiences with us. Who knows, your story might inspire our next tale of terror. Until then, stay safe and remember, not all quiet neighborhoods are as peaceful as they seem.